This lecture is going to be about R Markdown. It's going to be a very short and just description of what this is because I talk about it in a little bit more detail when I talk about reproducible research. So the basic idea behind R Markdown is that you want to have R code integrated with a simple language that can be used to kind of create documents. And so the coupling is going to be the R language with the Markdown language. So first of all, what is Markdown? So Markdown is a very simple kind of markup language, a kind of a play on the word markup language. And the idea is that Markdown is designed to help you focus on actually writing things, right? So if you think about if you're experienced with languages like HTML or LaTeX or some of these other, or XML or some of these other things, you know, one of the things that you notice is that you spend a lot of time thinking about the formatting and thinking about everything else except the actual content that you're trying to produce. And so the basic philosophy behind Markdown is to create a language that allows writers to do writing, basically, right? And so if you look at Markdown, it looks very different from other types of kind of markup languages like XML or HTML or LaTeX. And so there are just very simple, very minimal, kind of intuitive formatting elements, things like boldface and sections and lists. So it's the kinds of things that you would typically need in a basic document, but not the very fancy things that you might have. But one of the advantages of Markdown is that you can insert kind of arbitrary HTML elements. So if you're familiar with HTML and you want something that's specific or particular, and there isn't a basic Markdown formatting element for it, you can just put some HTML in the worst case scenario. One of the nice things about Markdown is that it's easily converted into HTML. There are tool chains out there that will let you take Markdown and, in fact, convert it into many different formats, HTML just being one of them. So you can get a lot of information at the website of John Gruber, where he has a lot of documentation for Markdown and a little bit of background on kind of how this project evolved. Now that was Markdown. What is R Markdown? So R Markdown is basically the coupling of R code in a Markdown document. So the idea is that if you want to embed R code in a document that's written in Markdown, you use R Markdown. And the basic idea is that it's going to look a lot like a standard a standard Markdown document. But there's going to be R code sprinkled in what are called code chunks. And the code chunks will be denoted by special formatting tags, which I'll show you in a minute. So when you integrate R code with Markdown, that's an R Markdown document. Typically it has the RMD extension. And so the nice thing about using R Markdown is it allows you to insert essentially live R code into a Markdown document. So when you process the Markdown document to create your HTML or your PDF ultimate format, you can evaluate the R code as part of the processing for Markdown. And so you know that the code in the document, if you're trying to demonstrate a tool or you're trying to maybe show some data or whatever it would be, you know that the code works in the document because in order for the document to be produced in the first place, the code had to be executed and evaluated and run. And so everything in the document, any code that you see in a document, you know will work because it had to work to create the document. So that's one nice thing about being able to embed live R code in a document, is that you can ensure a certain level of validity of the R code. So the basic idea is you evaluate R code. The results of the R code is inserted into the Markdown document. And R Markdown is a core tool in what's known as literate statistical programming, and we'll talk about that much more when we talk about reproducible research. But for now, it's important to think of R Markdown as a way to put R code in a document. So you can evaluate R Markdown documents using the knitter package in R. So the knitter essentially reads an R Markdown file, evaluates all the R code in it, and kind of sticks in the results of the R code in it, and then writes out a Markdown file. Now that Markdown file can be converted into HTML using the Markdown package in R. And so there's a kind of extra step of the pipeline here. If you were just going to write Markdown, you could just convert that to HTML right away. But if you're going to write R Markdown, then you need to use something like knitter to kind of evaluate the R code, create the Markdown document, and then bring it to an HTML file. So the knitter package and the Markdown packages are important for this. Any basic text editor can be used to create a Markdown document or an R Markdown document. That's one of the nice features of this type of markup language, is that you don't need any fancy editors to visualize what you're trying to write. You can just use any old text editor and it'll be fine. You don't need any special editing tools. So the basic workflow that you're going to use if you write in R Markdown is you write in your core document is an R Markdown file, so it has Markdown formatting elements and it has R code in it. Then you convert that into a Markdown file using the knitter package, and then you take that Markdown file, which is essentially an intermediate file that you're not going to edit this file, and you would take that Markdown file and you convert it to HTML using the Markdown package. And then HTML is kind of what you would view in your browser or other viewer. So now the key elements of all this is that you never edit the intermediate or final product. So you never edit the Markdown file and you never edit the HTML file. The only file that you're ever going to edit is the R Markdown file, which has the kind of original R code and original Markdown in it. The whole workflow is very easily managed if you're using something like RStudio. RStudio has knitter and Markdown integrated into it, and furthermore even has a little web browser built in, so you can actually view the final product if you're using RStudio. And I'll show a little demonstration of how to do that in RStudio. And just as one very quick example, the slides that you're looking at right now, they were written in R Markdown. Of course, there's no R code in here, so it's more or less just plain Markdown. But I build these slides using the Slidify package, which calls knitter and the Markdown packages to convert them into HTML. So there's a lot of flexibility when you're using a formatting language like R Markdown or just Markdown, because you can convert them into a lot of different other presentation styles.